Joya.
Page number?
Page
We're
218,
gonna get our tables.
for those following along in the songbook.
Okay, let's go ahead and get the budget workshop started and ready to go. Looks like the cameras are on, so Bob?
Okay. We'll go through
218.
dispatch and family arena first. I do want to say one thing in the end about changes to the budget that have taken place since recommended. In fact, let me just do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Please, sir.
You all received by email on Friday a table of changes in two steps. The county executive had originally recommended his budget, and from that time until the introduction of the budget ordinance on December 1st, we had a number of budget changes that take place. The vast majority of those have to do with personnel in the different departments. Our employee benefits fair is in November. People are changing health insurance and other benefits, things like that. So we have a lot of that going on. So there wasn't a great deal of change in that budget. There were two things that, as discussions continued, that we did come across. First off, there was an error in the original budget document. Our budget document is a huge Excel spreadsheet, and there was a faulty link where expenses in the recorder's office was linked to the wrong cell and had understated cost by about $86,000. And then the council has agreed that we're going to go forward with the compensation plan in 2015. So we added the $80,000 for that. Tourism has been added at your request as well. So those were the three major changes in the budget from the county executive's recommended budget until December 1st. And then the only thing of any real note that's changed, other than a bunch of plus and minus activity, some capital projects, items being moved forward into 2015 because they didn't happen this year, is we increased the request for payments to the levy districts by $5,000. The bills came in higher this year, and we're just providing for that increase in next year's budget. That's the highlight of the budget changes that have taken place, and most of it, as I say, is the normal personnel type information, other than the things that I mentioned specifically.
Bob and I spent a little time on that last week. Did anybody else have any questions over the credits and debits that were reflected in the, okay?
Okay. With that, go to 218, that's dispatch and alarm. And dispatch and alarm is one of our funds that's funded by one of our three tax levies for 911 dispatching. The budget itself is fairly consistent with prior year. There have been no new FTEs added. There is no new or no increase in the tax levy expected in this budget or forecast in this budget. We're riding with the 2014 tax levy of 3.9 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. So revenue, you see there on page 220, is very stable with prior years. On page 222, we start the operating side of it, and if you look at on page 223, total operating expenditures, you'll see there's a little bit of an increase in operating expenditures here. The increase is really accounted for in two places, and those two places are back on page 222, telephone expense and wireless communications. Telephone expense has gone up again, so we're budgeting for that, but on the wireless communications, we actually had an adjustment in this year's budget for emergency or for dispatch and alarm a month or two back, where we have a redundant system in our laptops that are used by emergency personnel that have two air cards in case one system goes down. And the second set of air cards wasn't in the 2014 budget, so we had to adjust their budget for that this year in 2014. And the line item for wireless communications reflects that increase in 2015. Those two items really account for the increase in the operating expenditures that you see. And the only other thing that I'd like to mention about emergency or dispatch and alarm rather is the fact that part of their operation is dispatching. Obviously, that's what they do, and we're in the midst of implementing the new 911 technology. We made our first payment to the vendor last week, so that job is in progress and will continue until completion next year.
Any questions on alarm and dispatch, their budget?
Is the building that Jennifer showed us that may handle emergency communications down that road, is there any provision in the budget for starting to fund that, or is that just going to come out of capital improvements?
We have capital provided for design. At this point, that's the stage that we're in. So there's a line item or some money provided for in 301 for design of the structure itself. I don't expect there will be any construction in 2015. At this point in time, that'll be 2016.
Long-term project.
And I'm looking into the possibility right now of the county being able to fund that construction internally and not go out for a bond issue. So borrow from ourselves, and having enough lead time in the process here to where I can begin to downsize our investment portfolio. Still working out some of the details on that, but I'm going to be trying to for that to have happen. So I'll keep you up to date on that. I'm just crunching some numbers on that whole scenario right now to see if it's feasible. I really do think it is for at least a sizable portion of the cost of that structure, if not the whole thing. So I'm hopeful that can happen. So just wanted to bring you up to date.
Do you have a budget on that? Is there a budget on that?
I don't know that there's a budget per se. I mean, we know that
If we build it to an EF4, you're probably looking in the range of 28 to 30 million.
yeah, it's a big structure. If I was going to liken it to the St. Peter's.
But remember what's
Facility.
going in it, so you're going to ask dispatchers who have to stay in place if there's a tornado bearing down on them and they can't go anywhere. So you either keep communications up or you don't. You're going to have the entire data center for the county that if we don't protect and that goes down, you lose that. And the emergency management function itself will be in the building. So that's why we're trying to contain that nothing else goes in that building other than those functions that have to be protected to an EF4. Now, if we go EF3, there's a lot less expense. But, you're also talking about wind speeds going way down when you go into EF3. And Dave's over there nodding his head over and over, but, that's the expenses in the building of those walls to sustain winds that an EF4 would bring with it.
Has St. Louis County made any of the provisions going all the way up to the F4, or what are other
EF3,
communities?
I believe. They stopped at EF3.
You can't build it like a big fallout shelter like we used to have in the 60s? For those of us who remember what those were like.
I studied those as a child in school. They were history back then. But they do not recommend that we go underground.
Okay.
Who are they?
Ross and Barazzini, who did the planning.
What was she talking about? We were just talking, the Joplin tornado was a 5, wasn't it?
It was barely over a 5, but it was categorized as a 5.
Yeah.
And I think Dave said Enterprise built their building to 5.
Yeah, I think it's more than a 5 because it's incredible that what their building's designed for. For an earthquake, it's over 9, I think 9 or 9.5.
Another reason it's good to be Enterprise.
All right, any other questions on the?
Bob, when's the last, we basically have used bonds to do the arena and the towers. Other than that, what's the last time we did a bond issue rather than paying cash?
The original arena purchase was by bonds, which we refinanced in 2010. But aside from the radio towers and the emergency communication system, I don't know. I'm just trying to think, other than NID bonds, which are just very routine. Don, do you remember any other bond issues? I don't in my tenure on the council, other than NID issues.
My point is, that's the norm. And we really kind of got away from the norm to do the radios, because obviously that was something we hadn't anticipated. So if we can do that, it's great. It'd be really kind of putting us back the way we've been doing things.
Right.
Which saves a lot of money on
A lot of
interest.
interest,
Sure
yeah.
does.
Back to ourselves, we could
Yes.
look at it that way, don't
I
we?
think the way Bob's trying to figure the numbers, though, he would include, if he's taking any money to borrow from this, any special fund, he would in fact include the market interest to make that, like if it's transportation money or something,
Yeah, I
to
would,
make that
We'd
fund
be paying
whole.
ourselves.
Right, we'd be paying ourselves.
I would be using the rate of, the average rate of our portfolio. You know, we don't have a long-term portfolio, so we're between 1% and 2% on our rate of return. But I'd much rather pay ourselves 1% or 2%, and, because a market rate bond issue will be 4 to 5, I would guess, very shortly. So save a lot of money with that.
Plus the bonding costs.
Bonding, underwriting
itself
costs are
is-
huge.
Right,
Right, 6 digits easy.
okay.
Ready for the arena?
Marina,
Arena, page 346. And I'll say that, first off, there's no increase in staffing. Staffing remains the same at the Family Arena. And the budget, the operating budget of the Family Arena, as well as the revenue side, for that matter, are basically mirror images of last year. And here's why we do that. It's not to try to take the easy way out on the budget, but right now in the budgeting process, we don't know really what shows, acts, and productions may come before us in scheduling for 2015. Some acts are very expensive to put on, and so you can't, if you try to forecast how much you're really going to spend for next year in show expenses, and you wind up with the opportunity to bring a top name show in, and you've budgeted too low, you now don't have the budget authority to really conduct that. So the budget itself is on the high end of both revenues and expenses, so that we leave ourselves the room in the budget to be able to operate properly. We have our personnel costs and all of our fixed costs budgeted as we should, but the expenses and the revenues that pertain to shows themselves are high on the revenue side and high on the expense side to leave us the room to operate in. In the end, it doesn't really, and if you look at the 2014 estimate for expenses, compared to what was budgeted in the year, you'll see that the operating expenses of the 2014 budget were $2,965,000. We're actually going to wind up at $2,435,000. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page.
Yeah.
I didn't flip far enough. I thought that looked a little strange. Yeah, if you look at page 346 or 348,
Yeah,
the budget was for $7,521,000, and our actual expenses in 2014 are estimated at $4.9 million. And if you look at the revenue, you should see the same type of situation where, oh, well, that was the revenue. I'm sorry. But you get what I'm saying, that the estimates and the actuals, we leave ourselves the room to operate in.
right, on page 346, what are the interfund transfers, and why do they vary by so much from, what are they?
Recently, we've had the situation where we had the use tax pass through that came through the Family Arena, and then is that what that
Right.
was?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe so. So, in the past, there was, funding that came to the family arena, that when certain of the sales taxes, became part of the use tax, we replaced the tax that they weren't getting.
It was the
In a
Streeter,
nutshell.
it was the Streeter decision, right, on the
For the
motor vehicle.
out-of-state motor vehicles were no longer taxed as a sales tax and became part of the use tax. And so there was an interfund transfer of use tax over to the family arena.
I assume that was 2012 to 13, from
Right.
$1,800 to 1.6 million.
Correct.
Okay, so in 2014, the estimate was 1.2 million, and this year, the recommended is 507. So why is there such a big swing between
Because the
those?
legislature fixed the problem legislatively, and the temporary stream of money is now fixed and stopped. We don't have that transfer anymore coming into the Family Arena Fund.
So it's back
That's-
to where it was before.
It's back to where it was before, and the finalization of that took place in August of 2014.
But bear in mind, and you've heard me say this again, I don't think there's anything in the use tax legislation that was passed and approved by the voters that would prohibit that use tax money to be used for Family Arena. When the use tax was passed for parks and recreation, this is definitely recreation. And if we paid the arena bond payments, $2.5 million out of use tax revenues instead of capital expenditures, we might get that emergency building a heck of a lot quicker. So something that I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think you know how I feel about that.
We hear you.
Okay?
Bob, how old is the bond? How much more is on the bond for the?
2025, I believe it's April of 2025 is when the arena bonds
You meant
mature.
money, not years.
No, I did mean, so
Oh,
it's
you
a
did mean
20-year
years.
bond?
Okay.
It was a 25-year bond originally, and when we refinanced in 2010, we did not extend the maturity date. The maturity date from the original bond issue was always 2025, and when we refinanced, we kept that maturity date the same so we wouldn't extend our debt and incur additional interest expense. So April, I think, of 2025 is our final bond payment.
What is it?
What do we still owe?
Do you know what's
What
owed
do we
on?
still owe?
I think about 19 million, I'd have to look at. I haven't-
19, 20.
Yeah.
It's close to 20 million.
What kind of effect do you think, what's going on with the hockey team, and is that going to affect the picture?
The
much?
league did fold. They couldn't
Yeah.
find another league. The team itself wasn't lacking, but the problem is that, the A level, if you want to call them that, hockey leagues, apparently the injury costs, the workman's comp costs, from what Mark has explained to us, are folding these leagues all over the nation. There's now apparently just one left. But what they're doing instead is they're going to junior hockey, and he's actively exploring trying to get one of the junior hockey teams in here.
Do we rent ice time with that? Like if like high school hockey teams and stuff, do they rent ice time at all?
We
Is there a
can.
liability issue with that?
No, I don't think liability is really an issue. We can do that, but putting that ice down is a very expensive proposition.
Yeah.
And keeping it down and keeping it frozen with all the utilities and maintenance that's required to keep that ice down. So if you do that, you want to make sure that you're going to get a good, solid level of use from it. So there's a trade-off of cost of putting that ice down versus what.
It's a shame, because we put a lot of money into boards and everything else, about a year or two back, I think.
Yeah.
Well, they were talking about scheduling becomes a problem, because when they rent the ice, they want to rent it consistently, and we can't consistently provide the facility. Is that what we were saying?
Yeah, that's part of the problem.
With wood for a concert event or something else is,
We have a polar floor that we can put down over the ice, okay? But if you have a commitment to a league for Thursday night, Friday night, type of situation, and now all of a sudden you're shutting yourself out if you're bound to the hockey league being there when you could bring in Alan Jackson or somebody, you know. So it can work against you as well, and you'd have to be careful about the flexibility of the arrangement you're really committing to.
And you're committing not just to the game time, but also to practice time.
Yeah, practice is another.
So they
reason.
have to know that it's more than just a facility rental for a few $1,000s. They need something that'll bring in some revenue.
It's just a shame, because we put a lot, I remember the bids came in for the boards, that we put a lot of money in that.
And we're keeping everything, we're keeping it intact, and
For another
it's
team.
helpful that by going to the junior level, that we'll also see the exciting players that will bring people in to see the hockey.
Okay. Any other questions on the arena? Bob, anything else we need to know arena-wise?
No, at this point, I think we're pretty well through it, and thank you for the discussion. It's been good.
I know Mr. Prismer wanted to spend a little time with us tonight. Rich, if you want to come up, that'd be great.
Is this in the budget?
Yeah, concerning his budget.
What page is it?
He's going to cover that. And let's get us everybody on the same page.
Yes, sir.
What page number in the budget are we talking about?
Well, we're looking, hang on a second, that one I don't have written down. It's Fund 233. I assume that's what you're wanting to talk about, Rich?
228, starts at 228.
228,
Thank you, Joe.
229, yeah.
Okay, the 233 fund is a fund that's protected by state law. I'm requesting that Bill 4163 be either defeated or tabled into next year. County Executive Joe Artworth asked Scott Shipman for $1 million funds to borrow. Scott Shipman, which his account is just like the 233, said no, and that was the end of it. Steve Ellman asked all the elected officials if he could use their funds, some of their funds, for a project that he had involved in. The majority of the elected officials said no, and it didn't happen. So both Joe Artworth and Steve Ellman followed the law. You cannot touch the election fund, be it election service, be the assessor, be it the recorder, be it the collector. So both of these gentlemen follow the law. I'm asking now, you want, in this bill 4163, you want to give the finance director the authority to not only budget and split up the 233 account, you also want him to take money out of the 233 account. Both of those are against the state election law, which is 115.065.4, which I can give copies to you all, and I'd be more than happy to, but I'll read it real quick. I'll give you copies. The election service fund shall be budgeted and expended at the direction of the election authority and shall not be used to substitute or subsidize any allocation of general revenue for the operation of the election authority without the express consent of the election authority. This bill, 4163, not only affects my election account while I'm the election authority, but it affects every single elected official in this county. Every county in this state has elected officials with these special accounts set up by the Missouri legislature. And it says you cannot budget or expend this money without the express consent of the election authority. The state constitution, Missouri state constitution, allows charter counties to do many, many things. But it's very clear in Article 6, except those powers to regulate and provide for free and open elections. In 115.065.4, it says that the election authority, in this particular sense, determines what is needed to administer elections. Funds were provided into the 233 by Becky Craig's formula and her legend on to collect for funds for future needs. Bob Schnur himself, director, a couple years ago, thanked me personally for thinking far ahead enough to collect funds to buy new voting equipment. That was funny, that was put in reserve. When Scott Shipman had $1 million for his computer, when Michelle McBride had $1 million for their computer, nobody came to him and said, you haven't spent it yet, so why don't you give it back? It's a reserve. I asked Bob Snur, does the county have a reserve fund? Of course they do. And he said, and your 233 is a reserve fund. So I'm asking you to either defeat or table 4163 until you see the ramifications. I have not confirmed these overpayments to any political subdivision except for the county. In 2010, my election county account clerk, Marge Muffler, overcharged the county, not the political subdivisions, the county, around a little over $91,000. That was overcollected. I am willing at this moment to approve that, not this amount, because it's a little over 91,000, the exact amount to go back into general revenue. I have no problem with that. The political subdivisions were not overcharged. What Bob Snur is saying, you collected money, you didn't spend it. I returned to the political subdivisions, the 7 years that they're talking about, $910,000. I am obligated by law. I have to estimate the cost, pay all the bills, and the county pays the bills. Bob Snur writes the check, Steve Alvin signs them also, pay all the bills. After that's over, if there's any money left over, that money has to be returned, and $910,000 has been returned. The money that they're talking about is money that was kept in reserve for purchases of future purchases. I'm going to need a lot of stand-up voting booths in 2016. I'm going to need more iPads. I'm going to need more stands for the iPads. There are things I need, and that's what this reserve was held for.
Okay.
If Bob Snur, if you authorize 4163, authorize him to split this or pass the budget. First of all, you'll pass the budget that splits this money right now. The state law is clear, says you cannot budget or expend these funds. So
I'm
the
going
budget's
to ask our
incorrect.
attorney to step forward and give us his opinion on that.
Thank you.
Harold, if you wouldn't mind, what, could you, I don't know, we're out of chairs, but if you,
Well, I'll stand up.
that's all right, you're fine.
Can my attorney, Drew Hefner, also give an opinion?
It's only fair to have him.
Yeah, that's fine. Drew, come on up.
Drew, come on up. You got another chair somewhere?
Yeah, Don just gave up one. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Don.
Harold, if you would address the issues that have been brought forward.
I don't think there's any dispute that the Election Services Fund is to be budgeted and spent at the direction of an election authority. The question is, what is that fund? Traditionally, the 233 fund has been used, and I think as the fund in which the election authority has placed both the statutory funds that that feed the Election Services Fund, the 5% surcharge, and the reimbursements from the state for your computerized.
And the clicks from the MCDO.
Right. So those are the two revenue streams that feed the Election Services Fund properly so-called. Our 233 fund has been used to do much more than just that. And this is part of the stewardship of the funds of the election authority. The other things that have gone into that fund include, for example, election costs charged to amortize the purchase of equipment. Yeah, and to pay for maintenance costs. All of those funds have been going into a single budget line, although they are legally distinct. One is an ongoing cost to charge to amortize purchases and to pay ongoing maintenance. And the other is the Election Services Fund created by the statute, fed by the two revenue streams authorized by the statute, and that is indeed to be budgeted and spent at the Director of Elections direction. Now, what the proposal is before you is to simply split those two elements of this single 233 account into two funds, both committed to the stewardship of the election authority. One for the Election Services Fund as defined in the statute, the other for the Maintenance Fund as developed by Mr. Christmer and other county officials to fund the eventual purchase of more equipment and to fund the ongoing costs of maintaining existing equipment.
So the bottom line is, though, from what I understand, you're getting the same funding. Is that correct?
We're getting more dollars going
The
into.
funding is going to different, they're actually budgeting. By splitting this account up, you're budgeting, which the state law prohibits.
But
cannot
but my
budget
question
this.
is, you get to spend, you're getting the same amount of money, if not more, to spend towards your needs. Is that correct?
Providing, well, Harold did say something
Yeah.
interesting. He said it's in my stewardship. So if he's correct, and these funds are being split only to fund the administration of elections, then that gives no one, since it's mine or my stewardship, that gives no one the right to take any of that funds, any of those funds out of any of those accounts to be spent on anything other than what I consent
But
to.
with addressing the budget right here,
Yeah,
what we're doing here is to addressing this budget right now.
Yeah.
This does not take any funding away from you whatsoever. It gives you the same amount of money. It's just separating it so it's
not-
appropriated.
It's not all in one fund. It divides
Right, but it's not taking.
233 into two
the state
different.
doesn't give,
But
the
it's
state
the
doesn't
same
give the
amount of
county that
money.
authority to do that. It says you shall
Harold.
not budget without my consent.
Harold, am I correct? He's not taking, no money is coming from this. He gets the same amount of money. It's just being divided into two different
In
funds.
principle, a single account is now being treated as two separate accounts. They do have different legal statuses. One is plainly statutory, and that's the one Mr. Christmer is calling to your attention. That's the Election Services Fund created by 115065 subsection 4.
Prior to me being elected.
And the purpose of this is to make it, is to make it more transparent? Is that the purpose of this?
The purpose is indeed to make it more transparent, to allow for clearer accounting of the 150, of both funds. Now, we have two here. One is to be spent at the direction of Mr. Christmer, and those are costs that can be dedicated to either services or equipment at his discretion to improve the conduct of elections. The other one is a set of revenues generated by costs paid by the jurisdictions that call elections, that fund, that amortize the cost of election equipment and fund the purchase of future election equipment. That is as if it were, that's like an escrow fund, a reserve for that purpose.
And just so that I'm clear, Mr. Ellis, that's going to be the 235 fund,
That's
correct?
235.
Then 236 would be
Is the Election Services Fund expressly called out in the statute.
So really, I think the question that Joe and I are talking about over here is, who has control of the 235 account?
The 235 account does not have quite the same protection, if you want to use that term. It's unlike, the 236 is spent at the direction of the election authority. However, the election authority and the county are funding the 235 account and earmarking it in effect for equipment purchase. It can't really be.
No, we no longer are. No, I lost my authority. When I had authority by state, one thing he forgot, he was talking about funding streams. I had another funding stream. The Help America Vote Act allowed for funds to buy voting equipment, and we bought them back in 2005. Then in 2007, the Secretary of State sent a letter to each one, and Drew and Harold had the same letter. The letter authorized me to lease the voting machines out to the political establishments to purchase voting machines in the future. It's called program income. It's another funding stream.
Right.
Okay, that authority has gone away. Why? Because the voting machines that were purchased by the political subdivisions, including the county. They no longer are protected under the HAVA law, so I can no longer lease voting machines out. In 10 years or 12 years, whenever this equipment does need to be replaced, you're going to have to come up with a bond issue or a tax increase to the voters to purchase new voting machines.
But that has nothing
My
to do-
authority is gone. So this 235 he's talking about is not for amortizing voting machines. We're no longer doing that. I've lost the authority to do that.
Yeah, but what you just said has nothing to do with what the county did.
If you had all read, Harold sent out about a 4-page explanation. I asked for a legal opinion about the legality of this, and I took the time to read that and look up state law. And the way it's being proposed to be done is actually more legal than what we have now. Right now, funds that are statutorily obligated to be under Mr. Christmer's control are commingled with ones that aren't, that should be under council control, okay? By doing this split, okay, Mr. Christmer has complete control of the funds that the Missouri statutes give him control of. And county government has the control over the other funds, where before they were commingled, now they're split. Accountability, much better situation,
So where's the
legality, much
authority to
better.
split it?
Hold
It
on,
says the
Just a
233,
minute,
you
just a minute,
cannot
Rich.
budget it.
I'm gonna ask you you've heard Harold and Joe gave a good explanation of the memo that we got earlier today. What is your opinion?
I agree with much of what Harold said, that there is this election services fund, which is within the discretion of the director of elections. I guess what I question, and I'm not too sure about, is the existing election services fund now. The money in that, you've explained, Harold, has come from two sources.
In principle, yes.
Okay. And I guess I'm concerned, it looks like in the budget that that fund is being broken into three different sources with,
3 sources or 2?
Two.
okay.
Which 3
There's
do
a
you
third
think?
transfer for the money that is due to the county for the overpayments and overcharges that took place from
And that's going into 234.
4 account, correct,
Out of the 233.
correct.
My question is,
Now you got
right,
3 accounts, 34, 35, 36.
Yes, Drew.
Drew, at the end of the day, the money that is allowed to the election authority is still there and is still going to be spent the same. Basically, it's just more transparent. Is that correct?
No, because I'm losing control of
Rich,
spending.
That's not the question. Would you answer the question,
Okay.
please?
Okay, you can answer it.
It is with that split. I guess the question that I'm more concerned with is that transfer to the 234 fund. If that's coming out of the election services fund, what's the source of that revenue?
It is not election services fund revenue that's generating that refund.
Is it in that account currently? Yes, it is, isn't it? It's in that account currently.
Well,
Yes.
Harold
So
has
you're taking
already
it out of the
explained it.
account.
Harold has already explained it.
No, he didn't.
All right.
No. It's in the 234
Chairman.
account. They want to split it out. They want to take money out of the account, and the statute says you cannot budget or expend any money that's in the 233. They put it in 233. If they hadn't put it in 233, I wouldn't have a problem. It's in the 233, and the state law
Okay, so,
says
Rich, hold on
that-
just a second. You asked too many questions too quick.
Well, the state law says that it
Just a
has
minute,
to be
Rich.
unexpended.
Just a moment, Rich. One moment.
Shall.
Do we have more funds in the 233 account than should be there? And is this taking dollars that were allocated to the 233 account that should not have been dumped in there to begin with?
Yes.
Is that true?
Harold?
Yeah, that is my
Drew?
understanding as well.
That's the point. I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers. I don't know what all the sources, where the sources come from.
The
My
source-
client's telling me that
The
this,
sources come from Becky Craig, made up a formula and a legend, and put in 5 categories of things that we collect for future purposes.
Right.
That's where most of that money that's in the 233 is from those 5 sources.
Rich, if
And I was following
If the
her
formula was
direct-
wrong, though, if the formula was wrong, and I'm not blaming you, but if the formula was wrong, and we were putting money into that account that shouldn't have been there, just because it went in doesn't mean that it should stay there.
But the county has a reserve. Why couldn't the election authority, the collector, the assessor, the recorder of deed, the sheriff, why can they not have a reserve fund? Reserve fund for future purposes. Had I not collected the money for the voting machine, we couldn't have come up with $1 million to buy it.
That's true. What the question that's before us now, though, is we got money in the 233 account that, as I understand it, you followed the formula. Everybody's saying you followed the formula. But if the formula was wrong and there was more money dumped into it than it should have been, then we need to correct that.
I would have not a problem with what you're doing, providing one caveat, that I have the control of all those accounts to be spent only on the administration election. I have to either get the approval of Steve Ellman or the council to spend a dime of that money. If you can convince everyone here, including the budget director, that this money can only be spent at my consent for the administration of elections, I wouldn't have a problem.
But Rich, it's no different than any other.
If you put in there that this can only be.
But every director or elected official, every one of them, it runs through the budget process. So I don't understand what, and it still comes to the council for approval. That's the process. So
Harold
I don't
just
understand
said
what you're
that
saying.
I had the authority, he said
Money that went in there should
You-
have
But
gone in.
you're saying that if you can say that it can only be spent at my discretion for the administration of elections, I have no problem. But you're not saying that. You're saying the money's out there. Even Harold actually said, well, the money's in the election service account. That is only at my discretion. The other stuff, it's kind of not sure.
Just a minute.
Make it sure that it only can be spent at my.
Rich, we have some questions that we're
Okay,
going
I'm
to get
sorry.
to. Mike Hilton first and then Joanne.
So I guess, so when this came up, we got your email, and so then we asked Carol, because you're saying that you don't think we have the legal authority to do this, correct?
Under the state law.
Okay, and you basically put us on notice that if this goes through, you're going to file complaints with the powers that be at a state level that says we didn't have authority to do this. Fair?
Fair.
Mr. Ellis says that we do have authority to do this, and we are on legal ground to do this. Fair?
Fair.
Hi, Drew. Hi. So, I'm asking you, as your client's attorney, do you believe that we have the legal authority to do this, or do you believe that we do not?
And I am going to tell you, I am not sure. If the money in that election services fund was collected as required by statute, then under 115.065, you do not. And I think that's where the conflict has been, where the finance department, the finance department says that this money comes from other sources, while the election department.
I can answer your question very quickly. Okay, because Mr. Krismer actually answered the question a little while ago. The formulas that generated these overpayments for the money that's being transferred out of 233 now was a set of formulas that was devised by Becky Craig, Rich Krismer, and Charlene Lohman back in 2007. Since that time, it's been changed about 4 or 5 additional times to make the formulas even richer. Now, those formulas are nowhere to be found under the purview of 115.065.4. Therefore, they are not 115.065.4 revenue. Therefore, they are not under the purview of the Director of Elections.
The law
Period.
says it's in the 233 fund, and it says, any unexpected balance shall, not may, shall be left in the fund to accumulate from year to year with interest. It can't be touched without the consent of the elected official, in this case, the election authority.
State
All the other
statute
counties
does not-
have the same
excuse-
thing.
One at a time.
State statute does not sanctify our Fund 233.
Then why
It
don't you put
sanctifies
in there?
two
minute.
streams of
We're-
revenue
we're gonna-
that go into that
Conversations are
fund.
going to be controlled by me from this point
Thank
forward. Okay, you're not going to talk over anybody. You're not either.
Can I?
No, you can't either.
Oh, you will anyway.
Okay, right now, Joanne has the floor.
I just want to make sure, Rich had called me last week, and I thought we'd get this worked out, but I just want to make sure you understand one thing, and that is that while this moves the revenue stream that comes from the statutory source into 236, so that your 5% plus the other statutory monies are always clearly identifiable and are your discretionary monies. It doesn't put the monies that are being derived from the amortization of the equipment into an account that the county can just reach into for any purpose. It just makes it transparent to the jurisdictions that let me just finish.
No, I'm sorry.
That money
agree with you.
is there for equipment purchases or maintenance as you need to budget in the future.
I fully agree with you. I just want to be known by this county council that this money can only be spent for the administration of elections. All I need is to know that it can only be spent for administration of elections. I'm sorry, Mike.
Mr. Cronin?
I've read the statute very closely. I've listened to what Harold's, read everything of what Harold did. I also read everything Mr. Krismer sent to us. He has statutory money by the state of Missouri that we cannot touch, and I understand that. But being it was commingled and how it was commingled is not a legal question. That is a bookkeeping question, and I trust our CPA to figure that one out. And quite frankly, from a lot of the expenditures that I've seen in the 4 years of the council for the election authority, I think the county government and the county finance department, the normal procedure from finance to administration to council needs to be intact for everything except for the things that Mr. Krismer has statutory control over, which is a very limited amount. I think we owe it to the political jurisdictions who have been overcharged in the past and would like to see a clear accountability. I think we owe it to people that complain to me because we spend $30,000 for 8-page Post-Dispatch ad when the ballot was 1 page long. I think we need to do normal county government, and the normal way county government would be is finance looks at the purchases, administration approves, it goes to the council, except for the items that by state law are allowed to Mr. Krismer. And what I'm reading in this bill and all the accounting, that doesn't change. He still has control over what state law says he has to control over.
Okay. 1 second. What all this really comes down to is, and it certainly looks, and I've spent a lot of time looking at this, it certainly seems like we've got dollars that went into it, into the 233 account that is under your purview that should not have been put in there. Because they sat there for a while, they got commingled with other things, that doesn't mean that all of those 233 dollars that are in there should remain under the purview of the director of elections. There's dollars in there that shouldn't have been there to begin with. That's what the crux of the matter really is. We've got to separate that out, and we've got to quit doing, we did it wrong, okay, collectively.
We already have stopped that.
Wait a minute. We collectively, we're doing it wrong. We're going to stop doing that, and we're going to make the right steps to separate those dollars back out. Drew, I want you to get caught up to speed and be able to offer an opinion to us as to whether or not Harold and Bob and Brent's opinion of where the correct separation of it, if it's being done right. I think that's reasonable. I don't think that's going too far. And I'm sure, Richard, you understand from the perspective of if there's dollars in there that weren't supposed to be there to begin with, they need to be taken back out.
The only reason they were put in there is because of the formula, not because there was never any overcharge.
I agree with that.
And Bob Snur, when he explained.
Rich, if the formula was wrong, we owe it to the people to correct that problem.
How do we pay for future costs when we empty the screen? I asked Bob, when he was talking about the split, in his office, he gave me his word that this money would only be spent for administration election. I asked him that, and he said this will only be used for the administration of elections. As far as the ad is concerned, Mr. Ellman requested me to make sure that the Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and Constitutional Party were able to be read for the voters. So don't blame me for asking. I was requested to do
Why
that.
is it 3 times larger than the ballot?
Right. Okay.
I was requested to do that.
Guys, we're not going to get down to the size of the print. Mr. Razzle.
I agree with most everything Mike said. Most everything. The only thing I don't agree with is Drew. I know he works for the county, but really his opinion, he's acting in the capacity as his attorney, as outside counsel. So his opinion is who I'm going to listen to. Okay, Harold Ellis. He's representing us, not Drew. Just to make that clear. So, and I'm not. No disrespect. I'm just saying.
None taken.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very fair.
Yeah.
I would, with your permission, I'd like to take a look at Mr. Ellis's opinion
Right,
as
but
well as the numbers to
just-
educate myself.
Okay, right. And here's a couple things, Richard, and this is not personal, none of this is, but here's the facts. Is during the election coming up in November, we have school superintendents or different entities calling us as councilmen asking, why do I have to pay $35,000 to the election authority for the bond issue when they owe us money back and we don't know the credits? We got those phone calls. So my point is, this has been going on long enough. Right or wrong, it's a mistake. When me, Michael and I, and you sit down with Bob and your attorney, we had a great meeting, went 2 or 3 hours. We thought we had it resolved, and you decided you don't want to meet with us anymore. We have to do something. We have to resolve this. So it doesn't matter you point fingers and do this and do that. It doesn't matter. Just get it over with. If it was put behind us 3 months ago, we wouldn't even be talking about this anymore. It'd be forgotten.
At the meeting, they showed me an audit, never explained to us. My lawyer actually believed that the audit was pretty correct when we had a meeting outside the room.
Right.
We came back and said, it'll only take us a few days. Then I brought back to my office, and I said, this is totally incorrect. I paid $910,000 back to the political subdivision. Where's that $910,000? That was never explained to me. We found out about a month later that he was talking about those 5 funds. Never explained to me, never told me,
Richard,
was never told to you. We were never told
but
about the
just-
audit, explain it.
We could go
fully.
tit for tat all night long, but me and Mike wanted to resolve this without all the attorneys in the room and sit down with you, and it never would happen. So what are we supposed to do? We have to do
My
something.
attorney. My attorney said,
Your
until we
attor-
get this straightened out.
And we got no answers.
Well, I suggest
Okay.
that Bill 4163 be tabled until we get this straightened out to you, he gets answers. And it's not gonna happen tonight.
Mike, can I say one thing?
Yes.
And that is, what Mr. Krismer said is true about the conversation that he and I had in my office at the beginning of October. Because he wanted to know, well, this money going into Fund 235, how do I know it won't be spent for anything else? Because everything in Fund 235 is money that's been collected from the political subdivisions in this county for election costs to be conducted or to be paid for in the future. We'd be conducting malfeasance, and I would, if I allowed a budget to be crafted that spent that money on any other purpose. And I told Rich that at the time, and that seemed to satisfy him at that point. So, yes, that money's going into 235. It's from the political subdivisions of this county, and it can't be spent on anything but elections.
Okay. What about the 236 account?
236 account would be the money that statutorily is under Rich's control, and that
Okay,
would be
and the
the account that would be
234
on, I'm sorry?
And the 234 account?
234 account is the account that all election costs are run through, so all the
Right.
costs of an election. 234 is kind of an in and out account where we collect money from the political subdivisions
Gotcha.
and we pay it out for costs.
That's correct. He's correct.
So you're saying he's correct?
I'm saying he's correct. If he's saying it can be only be spent for administration of elections, we don't have a problem.
All right. Right now, I hear everybody
I do have a problem with,
meeting is now adjourned.
like a long discussion. I know, I have a problem with 4163 unless you table it.
We need to break down these.
We need to break this down. We are going to have closed session after.